Hello, everyone, and welcome back for episode 13 of the Ready Set Shag podcast. I'm really excited for my guest today. I've been trying to mix up the content and try and bring new people on, people, like I said, that I really admire and I want to learn more from because I am just a lowly man here on YouTube trying to learn a thing or two and do so in a longer format discussion, which I know is popular among some people, but I try and bring these discussions where I can. And today, um, I'm really excited to be able to talk with her. A quick bio: she is a contributor, writer for the Post Millennial and Human Events. She's a transsexual, Catholic, veteran, and minarchist, which is something I just learned about, and I can't wait to discuss more. Everyone, please welcome Sara Higdon. How you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Like I said, learning about this brand new thing called as a minarchist, which you are, and just I guess we could educate those who might not know what it is. Could you give us a quick rundown on what a minarchist is?
Yeah, so it's an area of libertarianism. If you know libertarianism, there's different ideologies that basically spans from, complete anarchy, lack of government, self-control, individualism to constitutionalism. Minarchy is kind of somewhere in the middle to where it's pretty much anarchy, except for we do have a government that's sole role is to provide a standing military to protect our borders, not to go fight other people's wars, but to defend the country. And simply, I would consider myself an ANCAP. I just don't think it's sustainable. I think we would live in a perpetual state of Afghanistan and trying to fight off foreign invaders. So that's basically what it is in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. No, well, again, thank you for accepting my invitation to join me for this discussion. I've and maybe in some ways this conversation is a bit self-serving because I don't know much about the space of like transgenderism, the LGBT community, and I for someone like me who is often labeled as a cis white male on certain online spaces, it becomes frustrating to combat these sort of like, well, you don't understand historically oppressed people. So I wanted this to be a discussion so I could educate myself on if that is the case. Um, Transgender individuals being historically oppressed, and also like just kind of understanding where you're coming from and everything that you do. So you write articles for the Post Millennial and Human Events, and there's some great ones. I was able to peek at a few, and there's questions all around. First one being, you describe yourself as transsexual. What in your mind is the difference between transsexual and transgender?
Oh, there's a huge difference. Um, and we're trying to move back. A lot of us that are kind of more on the right wing side of the spectrum, or at least what you consider not far left, you know, we are trying to go back to transsexualism because, or what the term's transsexual, because transgenderism was kind of took over the space in 2013. Around that time is when it changed from transsexual. There used to be the crossdressers, then transvestites, then transsexuals, and the only ones considered trans under the trans umbrella were the transsexuals. And basically, that means that you have diagnosed gender dysphoria and you have medically transitioned, or you've taken the steps to medically transition, and you live your life as the opposite sex, even though you can't change your sex. We all know that. We recognize our biological realities, but that's just the way we present ourselves to society. And so transgenderism, when it took over, this was kind of queer theory infiltrating the trans umbrella. So transgender is an umbrella term that covers anybody who basically doesn't feel like they're, the sex that they were born as. So they consider themselves, outside of that. And so it can be whatever you want. It can be a social construct. And, again, I said queer theory before. Queer theory is based in postmodern neo-Marxism, and postmodernism in and of itself, they don't believe in absolutes. So when you start to say that, that's what transgender is queer theory, basically, in a nutshell. They don't believe that there's any such thing as absolute truth. So there is a huge difference between those of us that live within the binary, live within, accept the mental illness that we have, which is, gender dysphoria, and understand how it works, and those of us that want to change the way that everybody in the world kind of thinks about this stuff. So it's really important that we're trying to move back to a semblance of reality, because that's what transsexuals are.
It in one of your articles I was reading, you go in depth about like transgender versus transsexual a little bit,
Mhm.
and I guess actually an even a more reductive term I feel like is come out is just the word trans. Like it feels like
Yeah.
it's almost like this sort of slang, and I think you touched on it as well as trans trenders, people who are just sort of in there because their friends are doing it or because they think it looks cool, like they're getting some internet attention. They just sort of say like, "Well, I'm trans," not really understanding like your side of things is like you're dealing with like a mental disorder that
Yep.
that you live with your entire life, and you've been to doctors, you've obviously gone through a big transformation physically, uh, and then you have people who are just sort of like, well, I just feel like kind of moving between the the genders. Like sometimes I feel like a boy, sometimes I feel like a girl. Do you think it weakens what it means to be like a transsexual or a transgender individual?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing right now is everybody being placed into this category, and it also makes people feel like the vast majority of the population is starting to see them because they're the loudest when they, had their activism and everything like that, and they're starting to, take that and make it the perception of what trans actually means. And so when you say that, like if I go to say that I'm trans, they're going to put me in this box and think that I believe everything that, these people over here believe. And it's just not the case. And yeah, like when you're and basically they can't describe what they're talking about. They can't like they have no definition, so they can't like tell you, what a woman is or anything like that. And so it makes it very difficult, for those of us over here to just live our lives and be normal, because that's all we really ever wanted in the first place. And now you have a lot of us that have to actually step out of the stealth bubble and, you know, fight back to reclaim what was once ours. And now other people have taken this perception. If you saw one of my articles, and what I really have started to see, especially lately, and um, is that a lot of the activism, like when you look at the activism, you see that most of these people are not really trans. Like when you see what happened to Riley Gaines in San Francisco, you look at those crowds and you're like, wait a second, these people don't look like they've done anything to change their appearance. Most of it's all based on stereotypes. If they even label themselves as trans at all. Some of you may never know, because non-binary, you can still present as your given sex and be non-binary.
Mhm.
Um, but you see these people and you're like, wait a second, these are the people that are shaping our perceptions. There's maybe one or two trans people in this crowd. And it really started to link up to me that, again, this is critical theory. So they tried this in 2020 with Black Lives Matters. So Black Lives Matters with critical race theory. They tried to implement this ideology, but what their flaw there was, it required, Black people to take up the mantle and execute the violence and the activism for them.
Mhm.
Trans community, all they have to do is self ID into this category, and you can't question it. Perpetuate all this harm, and then self ID out of it. And yeah, you're right. The term, it's funny because I don't hear the term very much anymore. But trans trender is something that when I was first starting to, when I got out after I had got out of the army in 2017, in 2018, I started seeing this word trans trender, and I was like, "What is this?" And yeah, that was kind of when it took off, when this became a social contagion, and it became, popular for, especially for young kids to, um, say they're trans just to fit in with their friend group. And it kind of became more like, the goth kids or the emo kids or, the scene kids. That's like the pipeline that we've seen happen. It's like the popular thing to do for that more outcasts to get into.
Right.
That's kind of
Right.
where everybody fits in. The only difference is now they're medicalizing. And that's the biggest issue I think that society is seeing, is because we don't want children to be medicalized. Like, we didn't see that in those other groups, other than
Mhm.
maybe tattoos and piercings, which, that's different. But
Yeah.
they're taking life altering hormones and everything like that to try to be non-binary or even transition fully, and it's sterilizing them. And then a lot of them go on to have regrets. And we know a lot. I speak out a lot with detransitioners as well.
That seems I mean, speaking from the point of view of a parent who has young kids, that seems to be the biggest issue with me is, like, I'm fairly libertarian in the way, like, people can do what they want with their lives, right?
Mhm.
I'm not going to impose my will, and I don't want others to impose their will on me. But of course, I'll speak out on things that I believe are good or bad. I think we all reserve that right. But when you start seeing these teachers, for lack of a better term, almost convincing kids that they aren't who they were born as, or the doctor just happened to guess at their sex when they were born, and we have the chance to change that along the way. That's the kind of stuff, and I guess leads to social contagion, where, like, it. I mean, we can all be who we want to be, but when you start asking young kids who can't consent to anything to start reworking who they are in their brain, you're asking for a lot of trouble. And especially because most of this stuff is just being affirmed, like, at the drop of a hat. Like, someone says, well, I feel like a girl. It's like, well, you were probably born in the wrong sex. And then, like, all this stuff happens. And when I look at each case of detransitioners, there's a common thread to pull through them, where that's exactly what happened, is that they were affirmed after the first or second appointment, and they were started on hormone replacement therapy. And that's where I think, like, we need to start asking more questions about what the implications are here, and what could happen if things go sideways. What if things are happening a little bit too early? um, I want to run back real quick and ask, because this is a question that obviously gets asked a lot in this space, and it was going around after the documentary was dropped. But in your opinion, how do you define a woman?
An adult human female.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty simple. I actually have three definitions. I've laid this out before. So, um, a woman is an adult human female. A trans woman is an adult human male with gender dysphoria that takes the steps to, transition in society to alleviate their gender dysphoria. I mean, it's pretty simple. Actually, when I was on Timcast on June 1st, on the after show, Ian asked me the very not that question, but he actually asked me straight up, like, "Are you a man?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think trans women are a subsection of men." I think that's where a lot of my views get skewed online, because people think that I think that because I use the term trans woman, I believe that we're a subsection of women. No, like, otherwise you have no definitions. A man is an adult human male. And so we're not postmodernists. We don't erase, we don't erase reality. We accept biology. And so it's, it's one of those things that, there's a difference between saying, using different terms for gender nonconformity and how you present yourself to society and biology. And so that's why it's not, it's, I think a lot of people would feel a lot more comfortable in themselves if they weren't trying to force society to, you know, bend to this idea that, men can be women, women can be men.
And I think you make it a really good point. It was kind of it was something I wanted to bring to you, or a question I wanted to ask was, is the is this issue ever going to be solved? It seems, how I see it is, especially in the political sphere, is that this is a wedge issue, and it's going to be used as a way to fluctuate power between both sides as needed. And, like, because what I see in these hearings a lot of times is that you'll have, especially the right will say, well, are you a woman? Or they'll use the term woman to try and define a trans woman. And I'm like, it's almost like they're intentionally misleading what's going on. Like, we can define, as you say, that you're a trans woman, which is a subsection of men, because you were born you're born a biological male and you transition to be a woman, but you're falling under the category of trans woman because there's a lot of you that wouldn't line up with a natural born woman.
Right.
So, like, do you think that, like, politically speaking, these terms are intentionally being misrepresented or not used to force an agenda one way or the other?
Yeah, I think one side's trying to erode society, especially using children. Part of this whole thing that we're seeing is they're trying to erase the family structure, pit parents against children. I mean, in places like California and I believe Oregon, it's either Oregon or Washington, like I think Minnesota too, like they have these sanctuary state laws where a child can basically run away to those states and become wards of the state. You're seeing it, especially in places like Canada and other areas around the world, where if you don't affirm your child's gender, CPS will basically just come and take your children. So I think that, again, that is the Marxism aspect of this ideology that we're seeing. And I think you're right though, because then you have the whole other side, that's the social conservative side, that are not necessarily going to. They don't like me because they think that simply by living my life how I am, that I'm perpetuating the ideology. And so they feel like morally we have to, ban people from doing this. And that's why we get away from the live and let live aspect of both sides, right?
Right.
And so I think that you're right. I think that it's going to continue to be one of these issues that's going to be used to divide. Especially with social media. The problem with one of the biggest issues that I see, especially with social media, is people will rage bait. It's like you put something out there specifically for clicks. And I mean, I'm happy that Elon is giving back to creators, but that's going to cause more rage bait reactions because people are getting paid by how many people come and view and click on their like. So it's going to drive that, even though it's going to help creators and stuff like that. And so it's going to be interesting because I don't think that either side are really even looking at the solutions, right? So one side wants one solution, the other side wants another solution, the center wants different solutions, and we're all just kind of going, well, if you get yours, and if you get it, like, I'll take probably the hottest button topic is the bathroom issue, right?
Yeah.
Women want to pass laws like North Carolina did in 2016 and ban all trans women from their bathrooms, to stop the self-ID men from coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you do that, then there's videos going around that show that, women being harmed by this because people think that they are trans. And so it's like this whole cycle where, the woman was arrested because it was a lesbian, was arrested because she didn't have her ID on her when they asked her to leave. And so she's like, I'm female. What are you talking about? The other thing, then you have people like Buck Angel and trans men that can go into the women's restroom, or have to use the women's restroom. And so basically those self-ID men don't even have to self-ID. They can just say that they were born female, and that's that, So I think that I've always said, and then, the left just wants full self-ID where you can just self-ID into a bathroom and do whatever you want. And again, this is my libertarian perspective, is I just think that in government spaces, you can have, there should be third spaces. Every government run space, and then private business owners can make the decisions for how they want to run their run their businesses on their private property. If something happens in a bathroom, sue the business. I mean, there's different things that you can do there. I think you can make it harder to get IDs. I think if somebody's been on hormones for 2 or 3 years, it seems like they're probably, in it, Yeah. I mean, in the state of Georgia, you have to have surgery to get your ID changed. So, like, there's different stuff like that you can do. I just don't think, people that fully passed and haven't had surgery should be, you know, harmed either. So there's a lot that you can do to create these rules around this issue. But one side has theirs that they won't be happy unless they get this, and then the other side. So that's why you're seeing states like California be forcing self ID on businesses, and then you see other states like Florida that are passing bills that are forcing businesses to not accept. So if I owned a business, was in Florida, I wouldn't be allowed to allow trans people in the restroom that they present as.
I was gonna say, like, how would you even like, so, like, you bring up Buck Angel. So Buck, if I cross paths with Buck Angel and not know who he is, like, that's a guy. That's a man, right? Like, I would say
Yeah.
I would have no, and you know, like, even yourself, like, I don't think, like, you in a bathroom or Buck in a bathroom, like, at a passing glance is going to cause a stir. But there have been instances where men who are just clearly self-identifying as
Yeah.
a woman, you know, that are making other women feel uncomfortable. You know, it's like, but where do you draw the line, right? And how would you create a set of rules that, you know, I guess would appease everyone? I guess it would be really hard because one group would feel discriminated against because maybe someone's at the beginning of their transition and they're trying to just fit in, and you know, maybe they're wearing a wig at the time, and they haven't fully grown their hair out yet. But you know, it's like, this is one of those things. I feel like people are reactionary on both sides with it, and when there's a real discussion to be had about what do you
Yeah.
do, because again, the libertarian minded people or liberty minded people just like, we don't really care what you do. Don't do anything stupid because we will go after you with the full extent of the
Yeah.
law.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that we should have, I mean, indecent exposure laws need to be enforced, right? If somebody's
right.
doing something in a locker room and exposing themselves, you know, then you enforce those laws. And this is the other thing on the other side too, because I know there's other places where trans people have felt very excluded because, like, I think it was a locker room in California, not a locker room, a gym in California is female only.
Mhm.
I support that businesses' right to exclude males, whether they're trans or not. I fully support businesses that do that. There's another person who's kind of very vocal activist who runs an app, which is an all-female app, and it has facial recognition stuff that's supposed to weed out anybody who's only female. But obviously, it's flawed. But still, I mean, you gotta respect that person's, you know, private property. Even though it's an app, it's still their private property. It's their business, and they can run it how they want. And so I support that. But a lot of times, those people that I support doing that, they don't support the other way around. You know, they don't support the other person that's going to, you know, not make those rules. So they're going to try to demand that a gym be open to them and exclude trans people. You know, they're try to demand that on other people. And I just don't
Mhm.
think that demanding anything on anybody is a good idea.
I wonder too, like, and it's one of the, I come across this especially with like the drag stuff, that people, like, I'll say, oh, I think it's inappropriate for, you know, drag queens to be reading to small kids, and, you know, especially in, you know, in skimpy attire. And they'll say, well, why is it, you know, this isn't happening? I'm like, well, it is happening. Like, right here, here's a picture, here's another picture. um, and there's never really an answer to it because, and I always keep coming back to, like, well, what if I showed up to your house to read, like, I know you, like, you're my friend. What if I wanted to come to your house in a wig and a G-string and read your kid a bedtime story? Would that be acceptable? And, you know, I can't help but think that that would be wildly inappropriate because it would be,
Yeah,
you know, a
it would
grown man
be.
wanting to sit in front of kids. I mean, anyone, whether it's a man or a woman, wanting to sit in front of kids in like skimpy attire, I think is a strange hill to want to die on. And
Yeah.
again, it doesn't mean that, like, I've been to drag shows. There's some really entertaining drag queens out there. You know,
Yeah.
adults who can consent to that stuff and are going and watching it, fine. Bringing children into this space seems like a very odd thing to want to do.
Yeah.
So I guess that the question to you is like, where, like, what is your stance on all that? I mean, I can imagine
Yeah.
what it is, but what do
No,
you?
so so the thing about like drag queen stuff, yeah, do not bring kids to drag shows. Like that's pretty self-evident. I was a part of Gays Against Groomers, and we've done a lot of different stuff on that. I've worked with some people in Savannah, Georgia, to stop, try to stop them from having all ages drag shows and stuff like that. It's not appropriate. You're right. I don't know why any adult male or adult period. I don't think an adult and a stripper, adult female would want to perform in front of kids either. They would think that was
Mhm.
wildly inappropriate. So I don't know why an adult would ever want to perform in front of children. It gets really interesting when you talk about like drag queen story hour. So because a lot of times when you see these pictures of the drag queens at the drag queen story hours and stuff like that, they're usually fully clothed and everything like that. It's not really inherently sexual in and of itself. But what that is doing is for lack of a better term, it is grooming that child to see drag queens as something that's fun. It's at the library. They're great. They're nice people. They read to me. And so then they see the flyer and say, hey, I want to go see their performance. This is what they actually do. They're just coming to read for us. So I want to go see what their performance is actually about. And that is how you indoctrinate them into like the nightlife lifestyle that comes a lot with drag and drag. I mean, this is kind of the whole thing is it's part of a party atmosphere. It's usually raunchy, dirty, and it's an adult atmosphere that kids have no place in being at. But because they saw this person at a library, they want to go see them perform, and so then that's what parents are like. Oh well, let's go see their performance. I enjoy it, and that's why do wine moms want to take their kids to brunch to go see drag shows with them? I mean, why don't adults want to do things by themselves anymore without their kids? Like that seems like something that you should want to go do like that. But they want to like bring their kids into like their life, like outside, the adult lifestyle that they live.
Mhm.
It's not really right. And what's interesting is where'd the clowns go? Like clowns used to read to kids and now it's drag queens. So
Right.
I don't know, like replacing clowns with drag queens probably isn't the form of acceptance that you really think it is,
Right. Well, it's funny, like, I mean, I even think too that, like, leave because when I was younger, the lady who read stories, she's an older lady who would read stories at the library, or even I remember I was like in first grade or kindergarten at the time, and they would have like second and third graders come and read to us as like as a way for them to practice reading. But it it almost seems like again it's a way to sort of break down like this sort of like comfortable family um or even like in the postmodernist way, like deconstructing everything. Like you don't
Yeah.
need this particular thing. You don't need your family. It could be anyone. Anyone can be your family, and that's the vibe I get. And I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's just me being overly paranoid. But again, I I want what I want from my kids is for them to understand, like, I don't know, and this is going to sound weird, but like, I don't mind the traditional values of, mom and dad and close family and grandma and grandpa, and like putting my kids in front of drag queens just seems antithetical to how I was raised, and like, and it doesn't seem progressive. It seems regressive in pushing
Yeah.
for strong family bonds. I don't. It's not to say that drag queens can't be influential people or smart people or amazing performers. It just seems like a space that kids should be left out of and not,
Yeah.
you know. So that's kind of, I mean, and most of the stuff I approach as a dad because I'm learning. I'm learning every single day the ins and outs of parentage and how much I mess up, and it's insane how many times I mess up every day with my kids. But I try and progress forward, and I look at all the stuff that's happening and how people push certain events on kids, and I think, I don't know, it's just not for me.
Yeah.
But it doesn't
Well,
seem good for society as a whole.
no, you're right. And so, like, when we look at that, and it goes back to what we were talking about and what you even said too, is like the deconstruction of the family values, because then you're seeing it in schools and everything like that. They're trying to basically tell children that they have full autonomy and their parents don't know what they're talking about, and they're trying to keep things from parents and all this, and that is eroding the family structure. And transferring it over to the state. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't mind traditional values at all either. I think it's interesting because I think most transsexuals just want to live in a traditionalist society, but
Mm,
not in the sex that they were born, if that makes
right.
sense.
Well, and now kind of going back, walking everything back a little bit, um, like like your story, where did it all start for you as far as beginning your transition?
Yeah, so I mean, my journey has been quite a long one. Now, I will say, like, I knew something was different about me from like the moment I became self-aware. So I tried to dress on when I was like 4 years old and always wondered, always wanted to know what it was like to be a girl.
Mhm.
Um, and that continued my whole life. But I mean, puberty was one of the most confusing times in the world because I am bisexual. So I was like interested in girls, but then I was also envious because I couldn't be one. And I guess my homosexuality was more. I guess I was more like self-hating too, because the only time I would ever see myself with a man was as a woman. So I always wanted to be a girl with a boy. So um, it was interesting, and I kind of suppressed that. Again, I grew up through the 90s, so when it wasn't very open and popular, and I graduated college in 2010. I went into the army when, or I graduated in '09. So we all know '09. I went to the army. I was a logistics officer in the army for 7.5 years. I got married, did all this stuff, and I came out to my ex in 2014. And I'm glad I did. Honestly, I'm glad I came out when I did, told the first person when I did, because I don't know if I could come out in the way that everything is unfolding right now and just take it on this mantle, because I was already out at that point. So I was like, before the craze hit, and I'm like, okay, well, we got to deal with this. So if I came out now, it would just be like, oh, you're just following this trend. And it's
Right.
not. Um,
And real quick
and
question,
so,
you were married to a woman at the time or a
yes,
man? Okay.
I was married to a woman.
Okay.
And so came out to her, and then I ended up getting out of the army, and we separated in 2015. So that was 2014, 2015, like a year and a half later, we ended up separating. I ended up getting out of the army in 2017. Um, from 2015 to 2019, I guess, is when I kind of started to really explore who I was and everything like that. And came out to my family at the end of 2018, and I started hormones March of 2019. So um it's been a long journey, and that's the thing is I always tell people, like, you can't take this decision to transition lightly. Like I said, I started even thinking about it. I started like exploring like at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. So it's like it took me 4 or 5 years to determine that this is what I was going to do, and now we're seeing children do it with one visit to a doctor. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It took me that long, and I was 28 years old when I started to actually finally accept and explore who I was.
Wow. So how did your time in the was your time in the army affected at all? Was it like I guess can you tell me a little bit more about your time in the army and how it related to your gender dysphoria?
I mean, it really didn't,
Okay.
um, because I again, I came out, um, and this is one of the things that people always. I do want to say that me and my ex-wife are actually still friends. She's been amazing. It was, and that's what a lot of times when people come out, it's like, people want to think that the person like forced transition on them, which wasn't at all what that was for me. Obviously, I didn't transition for years later after I even separated, but I came out to her and thought I was just a cross dresser at the time. So,
Huh.
and she saw something else in me that I couldn't see in myself. So I think that she knew that this was going to happen before I did, and so she kind of set me free. I always say so. But we're still friends, and but yeah, I was kind of hiding it while I was in the military. I was. This is what was really interesting too, because I mentioned North Carolina earlier. I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina,
Mhm.
my last 2 years And so I moved to Fort Bragg at the beginning of 2016, and I was there for 2 years. And so I was there when everything started going down with the bathroom bills and stuff like that. But I would drive out to Charlotte, um, and explore and do all that, and then I would drive out to Atlanta every few weeks, like when we had time off and everything like that. Just again, just started to do that, but it didn't really affect my service or anything like that. But I'd be lying if I say that I didn't see something in those 2 years that made me realize that I needed to get out, because I really didn't want to transition while I was in the military.
Mhm.
And then I ended up tearing my rotator cuff, jumping. So, um, I was really just done with the army at that point, and,
Okay.
decided to move to Atlanta, and that's really was, like, the next chapter in my life, you know? I've lived, like, 2 separate lives.
Um, would now I kinda lost my train of thought, but what do you think is or I guess with everything that's been happening with like the individuals in the military, how is that sort of stuff? Where do you weigh in with that? Is it should trans individuals be allowed to be in the military, or is it something that we should avoid?
I think, I've always been somebody who says, "If you can do your job, then I don't care," and
Mhm.
that's kind of the way that the military has always kind of been set up as. I know a lot of people that have never served, or some people that have served and stuff like that, have weighed in on this issue, but they just don't understand that it doesn't matter who you are, you should be able to serve. Now, I get it. A lot of people don't realize that people take medications on deployments all the time. I mean, especially in the last, 18 years, 20 years, when we were in perpetual state of war, we had a lot of soldiers taking PTSD medications because they went overseas. So you think not only are we giving soldiers PTSD that they got when they came in, but um, so how when people talk about, and then they got to take medication for it, but how do people talk about barring somebody for having gender dysphoria, mental illness, when you're creating mental illness and keeping those people that other unless they have a severe PTSD issues, then you're going to keep them in the military. I So I don't have an issue with that. I understand where if you end up having like the surgery, that um that's a little bit different issue, because from what I've heard, you're on what we call a profile for a year. So you can't do PT, you can't do your job for a year. And as a former leader in the military, basically what that means is you're stuck in a unit, you can't deploy. That is a nightmare for any commander in the army, because they can't replace you with somebody. You're taking a spot from somebody else that is deployable. So those like profiles and stuff like that are very different. And so it's hard for me to say that you should be allowed to get the surgery while you're in the military. Um, I don't think I would trust those doctors anyways, but that's just me. I know a lot of people that have had different surgeries. Actually, I have a couple friends that are currently serving in the military that have transitioned, and they've had surgeries and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people are against like the taxpayers funding surgeries, which I get it. I get you don't want taxpayer dollars to go towards that. But again, what people don't realize is that like spouses can get like breast augmentation. Actually, soldiers can get like breast augmentations that they say they feel bad about their bodies and stuff too.
Can they really?
Because what happened? Yeah. So what happens? A lot of surgeons. So surgeons, for example, they have to keep up their OR or their operating hours, right?
Mhm.
And so they can schedule plastic surgery to get those operating hours. Otherwise, they fall out of what is it? Like I guess regulations, to where you don't have enough hours, so you could like you would have to go do more OR time with somebody else, like have to go
Okay.
back into that space. So a lot of times they do that just to keep like practice up. And a lot of times they'll do plastic surgeries like that, because when a soldier is when a soldier has been harmed overseas, like something happens, maybe they've been burned on their face or something. They have to, they get plastic surgery. So they still have to know how to do plastic surgeries and stuff too. So this is a way for them to keep up those hours.
Okay.
So it just puts a different perspective in there. So if you're against one, at least know the full extent to it and understand that it's not just trans people that are having like plastic surgery while they're in the military.
Right. Well, I wonder too. I mean, one of the things I think about is if it just seems, again, completely out of ignorance, it seems like such a traumatic thing to deal with, inside your own head. Like I've had bouts of depression, but I've never experienced it in a ways that many people have. And I'm very thankful for that. And if there's one privilege I have been bestowed with is is that I've not experienced like suicidal thoughts or anything like that. I'm very blessed to be able to sort of pick myself up out of depression. But I wonder, like, is it? I think the argument a lot of times is that we are, I guess, weakening our military strength by allowing transgender individuals to be a part of the military. Not necessarily, it could be pre-op or post-op, because they might not be able to. It's already hard enough for people to deal with the trauma that is involved with the military, especially in wartime. Again, I'm speaking as someone who has not been in the military, but as again, this is what I hear. So I wonder, like, is it something to worry about? It like if like I'm not. I'll be clear for those who want to clip me out of context. I want anyone who wants to serve to serve. If you have a passion to protect this nation, I think it's important to do that. But I guess, are we weakening the military by allowing someone with such mental deficits, in one area or another, to fight on the front lines or be an officer in the military?
No, and I don't think so. And one of the biggest reasons that I would say that is because what most people don't realize throughout the history of our country, I don't know about throughout our whole history, but for the vast, like when I started looking into things, actually, what people don't realize is there's a higher percentage of the population that served in the military that is trans throughout our history than there is in the general population. So what's you know and so I mean, because until recently when they were allowed to serve openly, a lot of people would get out and then transition after they got out, just like I did. So when it wasn't accepted and it wasn't allowed, that's how we know that there's always been a high population of trans soldiers.
Okay.
The other thing too is, and one of the reasons why I kind of think that has been is because almost like what you said, I've never once been suicidal in my life either. Um, but there were points where I didn't care about my life as much as I could have. It made it easy to go do my job because I wasn't worried about dying in a lot of ways, right? So I don't know if that should be the case. I don't think that but I never wanted to die. So I think that it just depends on the person. And no matter who you are, we have a big issue with SSRI use in this country right now because there's a high, we're in the middle of a mental health decay in this country. It's bad. And so I think we need to worry about what's causing those things and then not barring people who would do a great job in the military simply because they have, a mental illness that may or may not be supported. Like I said, I mean, I'm still lucky that I've never had suicidal ideations because I'm part of probably the two highest groups. Like when I started to come out, people started to like worry about that with me because they're like, wait, you're trans and what 40% of trans people have suicidal ideations. And then at least how many soldiers commit suicide every year? So that started to, people were like, oh my gosh, like thought that I was they would think that I'm this high risk person when I'm not. So I think again, it just goes back to the individual. and how resilient that person is. I would say sometimes, living in the life that I live now makes me even more resilient than most of the population anyways.
Yeah. So after the military, when did you start getting, you seem to sort of rise into a bit of prominence within the content creation community.
Yeah.
When did that start? When did that start ramping up for you? When did you become vocal about all of this?
Yeah. So, well, it was interesting. So when I got out, I was a warehouse manager for a company out here, just doing, in the corporate America. And I had started my Twitter account actually in 2018, before I even started transitioning. And that's when I started again, when I started seeing, and it was around 2016 to 2018 when you started to really kind of see trans trenders starting to come up. That's when the term was kind of coined, because it's when it really started to become popular. Because again, I don't believe that I call it the slippery slope fallacy, because I don't necessarily think this was what caused it. But in 2016, it was, gay marriage was legal, or 2015 gay marriage was legalized. In 2016, Charlotte passed the bathroom bill, the full self ID bathroom bill, and then the state of North Carolina went the other way. That's kind of what started the activism. And once you start the activism, you need soldiers. So when you need those soldiers, trans trending became a thing. And it became, and when you start talking about bathroom stuff, it starts to again put bugs in people's ears to be like, hey, maybe this is actually who I am. Maybe this is what's the cause to all my issues. And so that became the trendy. That's when it became the trend. And so at that point, when I was kicked out of a Reddit group in probably 2019, no, it's actually, I think at the end of 2018, for saying that trans trenders are real, and that when the detransition rate skyrockets, it's going to hurt actual trans people. And I got banned from these trans Reddit groups for saying that. I knew that this was going to be an issue. And so I had made some friends. Actually, Ariel Scarcella became a pretty good friend of mine, and she asked me to do a video for her channel. And I said yes, of course. And I asked her, I said, hey, I've been thinking about doing a YouTube channel. You think I should start one? And she said, absolutely. I mean, she's like, yeah, absolutely, you should. I also saw a Blair White video where she met Caitlyn Jenner, and Caitlyn told her to do what scares you. I hated being on camera. I didn't like my voice. I was always worried about my voice and stuff like that. And so that is what scared me. I can give speeches and stand in front of soldiers all day long, but being on camera is what used to scare me. And so after I did what scared me, and after about 3 videos, I just got used to everything. So it's kind of been from there. So starting in 2020, but I'll tell you, I mean, I just kind of coasted along for a long time. It wasn't until really the Dave Chappelle special a couple years ago that I did a video reacting to that special. So it was a trans woman's reacts videos to the Dave Chappelle special.
Mhm.
And that video hit 200,000 views on YouTube. And that was the first big hit that was like out there, and then even last year, I maybe had 4,000 followers on Twitter. And then this last year, I've met so many different people doing like Gays Against Groomers stuff. I was working with Outspoken USA this last year. And those types of things got me connected with No Left Turn Education. I've also talked to a lot of the moms from Moms for Liberty. And so I did an event with Nicole Salas in Rhode Island with the Independent Women's Network. And so that kind of connected me into there, and I got into more public speaking stuff. And so, yeah, within the last 6 months, I went from 4,000 to over almost 16,000 on Twitter. So it's really within the last year, things have really been coming together. It took about 3 years for everything to finally start coming together and start doing this. And then, yeah, writing for the post millennial stuff, I was freelancing. So I think I did my first op-ed last year, and I was just kind of freelancing work for Libby. And I've known Libby for about a year or so now, and she's become a friend of mine. And so I've done some stuff behind the scenes for Hannah Cox and Brad Palumbo. I've also was working on the Reality's Last Stand Substack with Colin Wright. I
Oh,
was his
wow.
assistant editor for a little bit, and then moving from there, I approached Libby because I was looking for some work, and the weekend editor position had just opened, or the weekend writer position had just opened, and so that I jumped on that and have been working there since April, I think.
Okay.
I'm working right now. I'm working 3 days a week over there, and it's great.
And a spot on Timcast, that's no small feat. That's quite
Yeah,
the show.
yeah. Well, two spots.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I got on, and then yeah, that was what was interesting too. Like I had gotten on Timcast in February, and that just worked out perfectly because I was trying to get up to DC at the time because the Libertarian Party was doing their anti-war rally at the Capitol
Mhm.
on that Sunday, and so I was able to get on Timcast on Thursday. And then I ended up meeting up with Matt Kibbe and his wife, and did Matt's show for the Blaze that weekend too. So
I
Kibbe
like
on
Matt.
Liberty.
Yeah.
Uh, Amazing people, love them. I just saw them a couple weeks ago over at Freedom Fest. Love hanging out with them. We hung out with them all night. It was amazing. And then yeah, did the anti-war rally, spoke in front of the White House, and it was fun. I met Ron Paul, my hero, and so it's been a wild year. I think, you know.
No, that's really cool. I You mentioned meeting Blair White, and you didn't meet Caitlyn Jenner, but Blair met
No.
Caitlyn Jenner.
So
What do you
Blair met Caitlyn. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about this? Is a question that well, maybe it's not asked a lot, but it's come up in a few discussions I've had with people. Caitlyn Jenner winning Woman of the Year. How did that seem like? Does that seem like a slap in the face to women, or was it a necessary part to this whole thing? Was it bound to happen
Um,
eventually?
that was kind of the biggest. It was the start of so much of this. And I'll tell you what I think about it too. Is I have been very vocal within the last 6 months, at least, as Caitlyn Jenner has started to speak out against, women in sport, like trans women in sports and everything like that. I've basically taken the stance that if Caitlyn Jenner really wants people to take her seriously as an activist in this fight, that she will give that award back. She will denounce it, because I can't take you seriously if you're still holding onto a Woman of the Year award, and where you basically were the start of gender ideology becoming mainstream, right?
Mhm.
Um, if she did that, I think that she would have a lot more people come out to support her. But I think that's a huge sticking point with me right now when it comes to earning a lot of respect from people, because Caitlyn has this history, and if you really want to be like you're reformed and you're actually fighting for the good of women, you gotta, the one thing that you did that really harmed women was take that award. So yeah, I think she has to give it back.
Well, it kind of relates to a couple of things in the articles I read. Um, it's almost like the sunk cost fallacy. Like she has invested so much into into being the woman that she couldn't, like, turning it down now would be like very embarrassing for her. So it's almost as she has to keep doing that. And that's not exactly what that relates to. I really
Yeah,
like that article that you wrote about how the sunk cost fallacy has taken people who are just maybe playing with their identity and extrapolated it into this huge, I mean, these very expensive surgeries, painful surgeries that are irreversible.
yeah,
I mean, breast augmentation. I mean, yes, you could get the double mastectomy and get breast, but it's never the same.
yeah,
It's never the same, and it's a painful process. Uh, but I also think too. I was trying to find the part here, but I don't want to derail too much. But yeah, I just thought Caitlyn Jenner doing that, and I agree, like, maybe giving up that award and saying, "Hey, at the time this seemed like the right thing to do, but I think a woman deserves this award." And again, this is where the semantics of the whole thing are kind of annoying when you watch it all, like, from afar, because, like, I am not, and I don't know many people who would be disrespectful and wouldn't call you a woman,
yeah,
Miss Sarah Higdon, like, we wouldn't be intentionally misgendering you. like you obviously know that you were born a man,
Yeah.
and Caitlin knows that as well. There's a huge history in the Olympics and understands how powerful the male body can be versus the woman's body. Like, but it's like people intentionally misrepresent the argument and not like, no, we like I'll call you, a woman. That's
Yeah.
fine because you present as a woman. But there are biological realities that we can't necessarily ignore, especially when it comes to competitive athletics. Like, I mean,
Oh yeah.
people's whole life, they train against other women, against their other sex, and then all of a sudden, because they're not competing at a high enough level or whatever. Like again, what's her name, Leah Thomas.
Leah
It's
Thomas, yeah.
one of the perfect examples. Like, underperforming as a male, but goes out and wins, you know, the women's NCAA championship. Like,
Yeah. Leah's the prime example of this too. I mean, the prime example to show how you never lose your advantage taking HRT, because all you have to do is look at the stats. So the average elite swimmer, the difference between male and female is 11% difference between the elite swimmers. Leah Thomas only lost 2.3% of her performance. And so that, to me, that explains why she went from 500, almost 500 to number one. There's nothing else you can do right there.
yeah,
But I'm that's one of the this is an area where I am very vocal, especially when it comes to this stuff, is female sports, because I mean, we have Title IX. I mean, if you start allowing males to take scholarships away um females, then it's a complete erasure of what Title IX was even intended for in the first place. There was supposed to be equal among the sexes, right? So it's supposed to give, like in college, you get equal. They have to have equal scholarships to females as they do to men. So it's a slap in the face, like you said before, and it's like and so I don't know if you've seen my journey of what I'm doing now. I am So I started this about 8 weeks ago. I have set out to, again, somebody that's been on hormones since 2019, what, coming up on 4 or 5 years. Um, I have started 8 weeks ago to break the raw female squat record.
oh, I did see some pictures, yes, or videos, yes.
Yeah, so I am going out. I've never done squats like competitively or even ever really done them. I was actually one of these people that, when I was growing up, I skipped leg day all the time, but I was in the army and it was used to carrying heavy loads on my legs, but I've never just lifted them for power. I was able to carry, rucksack and everything like that for 12 miles in 3 hours when I went to air assault school, and carrying everything at airborne school and jumping and everything like that. So I have strong legs. I've never done it like this before, and I'm beat up. I mean, my back hurts. I pulled my hamstring. And I'm a little bit older, so my body's older than I am, But I decided that this is something that only I could do. Probably, I think that this is something that only I can do, and I'm giving myself maybe a year, and I'm gonna break the squat record and just show, like, even somebody who's never trained this in their lives came out within a year and broke the world record. Like, that should show you that you just never get rid of the biological advantage that you gain by going through male puberty.
What is the world record? It's for female squats then.
So for my weight and my age, it's 285 pounds. And that's the raw squat record. So which means that you don't have the aid of, like, you can use a belt, but it can't be like the giant thick belts that give you like all this advantage. You can't use like the knee wraps that give you like tremendous like power in the legs, and like wear the singlets that give you extra to get stuff up either.
Yep.
It's literally just a small belt, and you can use like the knee supports, but they can't be like the ones that are designed to help you push. And so yeah, it's 285 pounds. I did a full squat of 185 last week, so on Monday. So I mean, I'm halfway there. I mean, I was a couple weeks ago, I had lifted up 235 pounds just to see how heavy it was, and it felt heavy. And now I'm doing quarter-inch squats with it, or quarter squats with it, and so it's getting there. I lifted 295 off the rack just to see how heavy it was a couple days ago, and I mean it's heavy, but
Well,
I think
progressive weight
I'm
training.
seeing progress. What's
No,
that?
like progressive weight training will get you there relatively fast.
Oh yeah,
If you're going up about 5 pounds a week, if you're doing it 3 times a week, you could go up 5 pounds a
yeah,
week, and it won't take you that long. And sometimes you can make bigger jumps
yeah,
depending on how you're feeling. And and I
yeah,
do wonder that. I do wonder if I know that there's women that are stronger than men, but like that's not like the outlier cases I'm not necessarily worried about.
yeah.
It's like overall, like there was it the Australian boys soccer team that they were 15 years old and they beat the
Yeah.
the women's team. Like that's
Well, yeah.
when you start looking at that, like that skill gap and how fast they are and how much oxygen the muscles are absorbing, again, across like the broad spectrum, the over average of everything. Not, again, the outlier cases don't really mean much to me because sure, you can always find someone who's a little stronger. But if the vast majorities of teenage boys are outperforming women, adult women, like it's something that
Yeah.
we should really look at as being an unfair advantage. And again, I think that we could get to a place where there's caveats for certain things. Like if you've been on hormones for 5 years and you've and I don't know, what it would be, but there might
Yeah.
be a time that would be able to happen. Maybe not. Maybe there'll be enough studies to show that men just even with years of hormone replacement therapy still have an advantage over women, and we can't,
Yeah.
you don't want to become the meme that men are just better at women than everything, even being women, like that's not, I don't think that's where anyone wants to be.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I don't see anywhere where you could have that caveat, which again is like why I said I'm like the perfect person to do this because yeah, you're right. There's outlier cases of people who females that are could beat men because not all men are athletes. I mean, so yeah, an elite woman could I mean, honestly, an elite woman could swimmer could go and beat 90% of men that are not like swimmers, right? So they're going to
Yeah.
go out there and beat them because they train for this and they know stroke and everything like that. And actually what's interesting about swimming is long distance swimming, like channel swimming, like when they do like the channel swimmings like and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Women, that's the only sport that women actually tend to perform better than men because they float better.
Okay, interesting.
um, yeah, but short term, I mean that, but it has to be like over miles and miles and miles and miles because that's the only way that that even comes into play. Because in a short distance, you're not even worrying about buoyancy, right? Um, but yeah, there's gonna be the outliers, like you said, like and the outliers don't necessarily like. It's so funny when I see somebody be like, "Oh, you're a woman, you could beat me in a sport," but but if you come up against somebody like me who's been an athlete my whole life, it's gonna be very, very difficult. Um, it, you know, if I train for a little bit, I'm gonna be able to do it. And I think that's why, like I said, I think I'm the perfect person to prove this because I mean, the IOC, like the rules used to be that after 1 year on hormones, they used to say that the advantage was gone. But now the studies are coming out to show that you never erase that advantage. And so like when I've been on hormones 5 years, I see a huge performance loss in certain areas that I do stuff, but it's not enough to say that, if I don't train at this one thing, I won't outperform even the elites. So I think breaking this record will be a huge, huge thing. It'll be a huge deal. And I'm just waiting for Elon to give me my subscription so I can start like posting to subscribers about all this stuff every week because I have all these videos that I want to show. And I'm like, hey, I'm doing this thing that could make me, I could actually help fund it a little bit because by doing it behind subscription. So it could be good. But yeah, I mean, I just don't see a time where males should be competing with females. And a lot of people would even say like there's reasons why we have male and female, not just sports, but like everything. Like typically, they say that men are better, like males are better at like poker and different like even card games and stuff like that. And it's because men become like will take more risks than women. So psychologically, there's a huge difference that places women at a disadvantage and stuff like this as well. So you can, I used to think like, that there were certain things like bocce ball or something like that where, you could have, equal competitive stuff. And a lot of stuff we do like co-ed sports and stuff like that. But
Right.
if it's anything that anyways, but I just don't see it being anything really that we could do. And I used to also put the caveat in there to say if you never went through male puberty, kind of stop saying that, because I'm like, if you've never went, if I'm saying that, then it's kind of advocating for children to transition, which I don't advocate for at all. So I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to say males don't belong in female sports, period.
Yeah. Why do you think that, like, do you think that kids are being like targeted as like to bring this gender ideology to them? I hear often that in like these book like certain books like gender queer and other books that Moms for Liberty have been fighting to take out of schools, they're not present, they're not mandatory, but they're in the library. What do you have to say with stuff like that? Like do you think that kids are actively being targeted? And um like how do you respond to people who are thinking like, well, it's not required reading, but it is there for them in case they want to read it?
Well, I mean, why wouldn't we put a Playboy in the library then either, right? I think that's the whole thing. Like, if it's accessible, kids are going to read it. And actually, if it's in the curriculum, at least your child's going to read it, and you can do that. If it's just in the library, their friend could get the book and then they get to go look at it, and they get to go read it, and it could be completely under your nose. Like you wouldn't even know that it's taking place. So no, I think, in a lot of these books, like there was even the public library in like Louisiana, I helped, I was fighting against one of these things out there, and it was like they were just trying to get the books moved to the adult section. They weren't trying to remove them from the library. They were just trying to get them removed. So if like a parent wants to give them to their child, then that's up to them. That's up to the parent's discretion. But it shouldn't. A lot of these books should not be completely accessible to kids in a library. I just don't think so. And I do think that kids are, in a lot of ways, I think there's a lot of stuff happening. I think that there's a lot of different people that play roles in what's going on. I think that there are people who are out there specifically targeting children to push their ideology, and they want to make this. I mean, that's what you see with the TikTok teachers and stuff like that. You see the Governor Pritzker of Illinois. Yeah, Illinois. Um, you can just see how his whole operation is to indoctrinate children with this stuff. So it's like, with him, he's the governor. He donated millions of dollars to the Laurie's Children's Hospital in Chicago, to fund their gender clinic, to start their gender clinic around 2012. And then he implemented his um, as a Department of Education implemented comprehensive sex education that goes all the way down to kindergarten, to where the Laurie's Children's Hospital is giving these materials and giving like sex toys and stuff to the kids for this comprehensive sex education. So when I'm talking about people targeting, it's people like that are targeting, like they're making money off of this in some shape or form. I think doctors, I mean, we saw it in the Vanderbilt Hospital with that video that Matt Walsh released a few months ago. That was like, this is a big money maker. It was all about money and all this. It wasn't about the actual good of the children. I think that there are some people who are out there. They know that it's a high propensity of the kids to have autism who are transitioning right now, and they're not really screening for it. And so I think that there's some eugenics at play there. I think that people are actually actively, they may, like you said, it's regressive. They are transitioning autistic kids and sterilizing them, and which is a form of eugenics. and then I think there's we call them the Transhausen mommies, which is like Munchausen by proxy. They get woke points for being it's usually the upper middle class white progressive woman who or man who is transitioning their child, is so proud of their trans child that is kind of pushing this on them because they're woke activists and they get points for this, and so they kind of push it on them. You have teachers who they don't realize they're doing. And then this is the last one, I guess, is like the person that thinks that they're doing what's right for the child, like they have kind of bought into the narrative, and so they've got their emotions have been played on so much that they don't necessarily know what to do, and so they've bought into this narrative of you can have a you have to affirm them, affirm, or else they're going to commit suicide. Like even though that before this became a craze, there's been trans people all over, and we've never affirmed, and it hasn't really been the case,
Right.
It's just kind of this new thing that they're kind of, and that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy when you're telling kids that they're going to kill themselves if they don't, or unalive themselves if they don't.
Right.
If they don't transition, you're putting ideas into these kids' heads. There was a teacher in Louisiana when they were testifying on a bill that would require parents to sign off on a child's like name change and gender marker change or pronouns change at their school. So the parents had to approve of it before they did it on that bill. And what the teacher said, well, I can't have this. It was basically like a don't say gay bill. So I was like, I can't discuss this with my children. Like when one of my kids asked me about my gender identity and I told them, I'm non-binary. And then am I supposed to tell the 5 kids that came up to me after that, that I can't talk to them about that? I'm like, what you don't realize is you just put that idea into their head. They didn't know about this. You literally just told them what will make you accept them. You just gave them this thing so that they can come and, okay, well, maybe this is what is going on. So when you implant ideas, and I don't think a lot of people realize that stuff either. And like I said, I think there's just a lot of people who, I feel for any parent who is going for this right now too, because parents are being manipulated left and right by doctors, politicians, activists, everybody out there. And so they're kind of put in this tough position as to what do you do? And I don't know if you saw Chloe Cole a couple weeks ago testifying when she actually addressed the mom that was at the table and she said, "You remind me of my parents, and I just don't want your child to go through what I went through." But
And
sometimes
Chloe,
you just don't know.
Sorry to interrupt. Chloe is one. Chloe Cole is one that only had a few appointments with her therapist, and basically the therapist said to her because her parents it sounded like were willing to push back on on everything that was going on, and the doctor essentially said, well, you could have a unalive daughter, or a son, or you could have an alive trans daughter or whatever. And I just thought, and those are the things that, like, there's a lot that about this whole thing, again, as a parent, that I'm very aware of now, and also I try and keep an eye on, because kids are very impressionable, and I know that what we're teaching kids, like, what to think nowadays, not necessarily how to navigate things in difficult ways. Like, again, just even the whole, like, well, we'll just affirm who you are. It's like, well, that's not how it works. Like, in order to grow your mind, you need to understand, like, sometimes you have to do the wrong things or be the wrong thing and work through problems. And it's not even, it almost sounds cold-hearted, but some people won't make it through. That doesn't mean I want anyone to disappear off this planet. I want everyone to love and thrive and be who they want to be. It's not a realistic expectation that everyone will make it out of this alive, right? Which sounds bad, but it's not. What I mean is we need a way to give kids hurdles, not move hurdles out of the way. Life is about balancing what you know and what you don't, and getting stronger, overcoming your fears, overcoming your insecurities, all of that. It's all part of growing up. It's part of puberty. especially puberty. And when you don't get a chance to go through that, you're leaving people very, very vulnerable later on in their life. And it makes me think, well, we've never really, in the past, 40, 50 years, we haven't really had anything to fight for anymore. Like the wars
Yeah.
are over, really. The world wars are pretty much done. There's nothing really threatening our security anymore. So we have ways of inventing issues for each other. And something that should be probably years in the making when it comes to transitioning is now like an overnight, like, I'm just going to Uber that, or not Uber, but like DoorDash, my new gender, because I'm just not happy with this,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's just a phase. And I think, I always forget her name. She's done a lot of work with detransitioners. I can't think of her name right now. But, a lot of this we've seen has just been phases. Like, it might be uh, a boy or girl who's just trying to experiment, doesn't really know, but eventually kind of comes back around. And once they see the full extent of these choices, right? Like, they make drastic changes the way Chloe did. And then
Yep.
all of a sudden realizes, no, this is not really who I am, and I should have taken more time with it. But but we can't talk about that. Now, it seemed to be one of her main messages was that we can't even have these conversations and inform people who want possible gender reassignment surgery, to know this is what could happen. This is
Yeah.
this is the possible road, or this is the road to recovery. I think, sorry to ramble on. um,
Oh.
uh, Kaiser Permanente put out a pamphlet of vaginoplasty and what it entails as far as the recovery goes. I mean, like 6 to 8 months of like physical recovery, and then a lifetime of medication just to keep up the dilation and all that. And
Yeah.
it's wild that, it's wild to see that people are pushing that kind of surgery for people to do without fully understanding the extent of it. I mean, I'm glad that that pamphlet exists, but it's horrifying to think that kids might be making that decision, or young adults might be making that decision willy-nilly.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that happens too, like you said. I mean, unfortunately, well, it is a situation of, money my problems, because
Yeah.
when we don't have when you don't have problems, you invent them, and that's kind of what's going on. When Matt Walsh went to Africa in the What Is a Woman documentary, it kind of showed that, like, they don't have these same worries because they're out there just trying to survive and live every day.
Right.
And we don't have that. We're such a well-developed nation where we've always been given, and that's part of the other issue is my generation. We've kind of been given everything. We were
Yeah.
kind of the last generation, and we moved on, and we want to just give our kids stuff. We want our kids to be validated for everything that they do. We'd never, we were the first generation of like the helicopter parents, and it's like when you coddle your children so much, you just want them to always be okay, and then you teach them that society will do that. And I remember kids have always kind of felt this way growing up, and everybody would say, just wait till you get to the real world. It's not going to be like that. Well, unfortunately, this generation, the real world has started to coddle to them. And that's the issue that happens. And people need to realize that you can only control your own emotions, in your own behaviors. You can't control what other people do, how other people feel about you. I think that if we could learn to do that, we can learn to accept each other. Now, like with like Chloe and stuff like that. I mean, I love Chloe to death. Me and her have done multiple events together. We're good friends. And so I will tell you one story that is just a lot of kids just aren't hearing the other side. I think that's part of the issue is a lot of kids aren't hearing the other side. Like you said, we're rushing kids into stuff, and it's like so when they go to the doctor starts rushing them through this stuff because they're getting paid to do this and all this other stuff. But when you tell them the other side, tell them they should wait, tell them this stuff, they need to they start to think about it when they get the pushback. So for example, we and Chloe did an event in January in Wisconsin, and it was with Jeanette Cooper from I forget what her organization is off the top of my head, but we did this event, and Jeanette is in a custody battle for her child as well, who transitioned, and it's been a big issue. And so the organizer of it texted me after we had done it, and somebody was in the audience whose child was questioning their gender, and he brought them to hear us speak and speak about this issue. On the way home, she said, "You know what? The speakers were right. I'm going to wait." And so that's the type of work that happens when you get the other side and you hear the stories. It's not this doom and gloom, because when you tell a child or tell parents that they can either have a dead child or a trans child, um, you're giving them one option, and you're not telling them the full story of what it could be. And when people ask me, well, what about the one, the 0.01% of the population that is trans? I said, well, you don't harm the 9 to save the 1, right? You don't like make everybody trans and then just in order to save one, because then you're going to have other issues down the road. And so that one, get them to a therapist, a good therapist, not one of these gender therapists that pushes it. Because that's the other issue that I have right now too, is I think a lot of our mental health professionals are either just lazy, because not only pushing gender, like they're just like throwing pills at instead of talking to their patients and actually diagnosing them and actually helping them through their issues, they're throwing SSRIs or gender transitions at them, right? So I think
Yeah.
that there's a lot of issues with that in our mental health professions. So take them to a good therapist that's actually going to question them, push back, and make them, get them, if they are trans, if they really do suffer from gender dysphoria and they really would benefit, get them to a point to when they are an adult and they can actually do this. Because honestly, my personal opinion, if you are suicidal, then I don't think that you are mentally prepared to transition, because it's not an easy thing to go through. Like, I think people think like, oh, I'm gonna take these medications and it's gonna be this fix. It's not. I mean, you're always gonna worry about, are you getting clocked? Is somebody going to clock you? There's different things that you're always going to have to worry about. And society is just never going to change enough to be like, so accepting of everybody that, that you won't worry about this stuff, or you'll ever have to, and then you go through all these surgeries and all this stuff. You can't, you sterilize yourself, you do all this other stuff. It's not an easy thing to do. And I mean, I just don't think kids are ready to make that choice. So we can work with mental health agencies to get them to an age, into a mental state where they can cognitively consent to those decisions. We have rules, we have ages of adulthood. Some people think it should be 25, everything like that. But I think whatever our age of adulthood is, set it there, get them to adulthood, and then they can make the decisions for themselves. Um, it's interesting to me, when we were trying to pass a bill here in Georgia, that they, um, the state of Georgia, you can't get, in some states, you can get tattoos with parental permission under the age of 18. The state of Georgia, you can't. And yet they're still trying to fight against life altering elective surgeries for minors here, but I mean, we
Yeah.
passed it. And so it works, but it's still, I'll tell you, one of my fears though with a lot of these bills is that they designated it to gender dysphoria. So I'm afraid that some of them are going to have we're going to see a lot of challenges to these bills on 14th Amendment, equal rights protection, or equal protection, equal rights law, equal protection clause, because a 16-year-old female can get breast implants, but a 16-year-old boy can't. And I think that is where they're going to where we're going to see an issue in the courts. Supreme Court, they make the final decision. Right now, I don't know. They've been very by the book on everything, even when it doesn't go to conservatives' way. So we'll see what happens there.
It's certainly that's why I think to some extent a lot of this is a problem that politicians want to exist for a long time because it allows them to sort of transfer power between themselves when they need more votes, more voters, or they need to pass some sort of self-serving legislation. And that, again, there's and I
Nevada.
yeah, and like there's I think the bigger crisis that we're facing is the American healthcare system is just a total mess,
Yeah.
wall to wall. And I think there's less focus on that and getting people the help they need, especially vets. Like, I mean, I hear all the time that the VA is just an absolute disaster, and it's like one
It's
of the best
garbage.
cases against. Yeah, and it's one of the
It's
best
garbage.
one of the best cases against like socialized healthcare, or in the government run healthcare, because they've already failed at it. And to put it on an even bigger scale would just be like, it could be devastating. It might not be, but
Yeah.
again, we kind of learn from what we see in history in general.
No, you're right. Actually, when you look, all you have to do is even look at like the UK and other areas where gender medicine is a prime example with this. So, like the UK, they have they have long waiting lists to even get seen by a doctor for gender medicine,
Wow.
because so many trenders jumped in to get all this stuff, and so it caused an influx of people getting referred, which means that they now have waiting lists. So those that are actually suffering from dysphoria are not getting treated the way that they should. So if you really look at it that way, like, what are you helping? And
Right.
yeah, VA medicine, I haven't
I've
even
used
changed my name in the VA system because I'm afraid that it's going to cause an issue with my disability
Oh,
payments.
I bet it would. I was even talking with a friend, who's also a trans woman, said that one of the issues too with a lot of stuff happening is like with the "Don't Say Gay" bill, is, or quote unquote "Don't Say Gay"
Yeah.
bill, was that it was actually interrupting, or not the "Don't Say Gay" bill. I'm sorry, it was some other legislation in Florida, about gender affirming care, but it was blocking adults from getting the hormones that they were already on, because it wasn't properly distinguishing between like adults and minors.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things where politicians use it for political points and to try and be anti woke or whatever, and not understanding, like, well, now these nurses or now these doctors aren't giving the proper medication to the people who have already been on it for years as
Yeah.
an adult. Um, and that's where I think this is just, it probably will go on for a long time, because it's hard to wrangle power from those who enjoy it so much, who benefit
No,
from it
you're
most.
absolutely right. Well, and even well, when you talk about like medical stuff, like the one study that they have that shows that children transitioning is beneficial and it reduces suicidality is like the worst study in the world. Like it's a survey, and
Mhm.
most people don't realize like survey studies, they're not accurate like at all. They surveyed adults, and adults are saying that yes, like basically saying yes, I regret not transitioning when I was younger, so it would have helped. Like
Mhm.
that is what that's the study that they're going off of. And it's extremely flawed because of the way that questions are written and everything like that. It's not a proper way to do a study, yet this is the study that everybody quotes when they do it. And so you're
Right.
right, politicians use this study, and this is one of the studies that they quoted in Nevada when the governor vetoed the legislation in Nevada. So when I mentioned Nevada, Republican governor vetoes legislation that would have banned this stuff, basically so that the Democrats would fund his baseball stadium in Vegas.
Yeah.
You know, like that's
Right.
that's that's exactly what happens with politicians and stuff, and they're not careful enough, like you said, with the language, and that's what I'm concerned. I mean, I know a lot of these politicians. Like I've been kind of doing some lobbying across different states and at least consulting with legislators. I was actually very active here in Georgia. I spent multiple days at the Capitol meeting with politicians, meeting with our head of health and human services department, which is really interesting when you see like even the Republicans who have doctorates or who are former doctors
Yeah.
pushing, like, you can tell that they're in the pocket of big pharma, because or the big pharma's in their pocket, because had a politician argue against that, saying telling me that puberty blockers are not or are fully reversible, Republican. And you realize, and I was arguing with him in his office, and I'm like, this, but you realize it was he's a doctor, and he wrote into the bill to protect other doctors. So basically, the bills prohibited it, but then it said that they could not be criminally or civilly prosecuted.
Right.
And so they were going to kill the bill when it went to when the House changed that provision to say no, we're going to amend this, and they can be held liable basically for breaking this law. We passed it, but we didn't get puberty blockers. So puberty blockers are still allowed to be used in Georgia, but cross-sex hormones and surgery is not. Now, when I look at something like that, I still look at it as a win, because I say, even though we weren't, it still will probably have the same effect, because no doctor is going to prescribe puberty blockers if there's no way to go on to cross-sex hormones at the age of 16. It's just not going to happen. So I think it still, has the desired effect, but it would have been nice to have it in there. But I talked to a lot of these legislators, and yeah, a lot of them, like, most people don't realize, like, almost everybody I talk to, and I've met people from across the spectrum, MAGA Republicans, all over. I've had people come up, give me hugs at these events and everything. And it's like, everybody says, I don't care what adults do, but, leave the kids alone. And that is why I don't like, again, the online space as much, because you get these wild perceptions because of the most extremes.
Yeah.
When 90% of the people aren't even on those extremes. I mean, like, the number of people that are even registered to use Twitter here in the US is small.
Yeah.
Compared to the general population. So I think most people don't care what adults do. They just don't want to see kids being harmed. And actually, we know that even 68% of Democrats don't agree with medicalization of kids. Latest studies all show that too. But yet politicians are doing their own thing to push their own agendas, and people just aren't voting them out of office because apparently they don't care that much about kids,
Yeah.
Same thing. I think it's 71% of people don't agree with males in sports, and yet they push and push and push this stuff like it's mainstream.
Yeah. No, it's something that I've realized too, is that if you're operating your life based on like Twitter trends, you're probably doing it wrong. Like, it's not like, it's just not indicative of really anything other than the people on Twitter. And there's so many, as like you said earlier, now that people are getting paid for their engagements and or impressions on Twitter, there's a lot more bait out there to get people to interact or to visit things. And it's just too bad, because I think people get sucked into that Twitter vortex and thinking like, oh my God, all this stuff is rampant. And it's like, I don't think it's as wild and rampant as people would have you believe on Twitter. But I think Twitter is a good way to realize like, oh, there's something going on in Georgia. Like, we should, what's going on? Oh, there's something going on in Utah or Nevada or wherever. Like, we can pinpoint where these things are happening, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every kid's being handed a copy of Genderqueer. But it doesn't mean that particular instance isn't, or that particular book isn't inappropriate for kids between the ages of 7 and 11 or 12 or whatever. We need to know these things. But I think it's an issue that people have, is they don't know how to unplug from social media. They do think of it as an accurate representation of life. And they don't know how to balance like the news stories with their real life. Like, does everything involve my kids? No, there's things I don't need to really worry about right now, but I should be aware that some teachers are trying to push certain ideologies in assignments, in books. I should be aware of what books my kids are reading. And these are things that you should just be doing anyway as a parent. You should just be involved with your kids and their homework and what's going on, like my mom was. So
you're taking an active role in your kids' lives. I mean, that's what we should be doing. I think COVID kind of just released a lot of this to when kids were at home and thinking and seeing what was actually, and parents were seeing what was going on. And I think that people need to go and really look to see what like social emotional learning really is about, like stuff like that, because that's like subversive. Because again, it's like these Kalifka traps where like why don't you want kids to be socially, emotionally well when they're learning? Like,
Yeah.
well, if you go and actually look at it, you'll realize it's the social credit system playing out in
Yeah.
front of us. So like you have to like dive into those types of things. So I think just there's so many people that are unaware. I think you're right. But I mean, I go back home to visit my family, and they live in a small town and they don't really see a lot of this stuff because they just watch local news and it's not even about any.
Yep. Oh no. Is it my connection or did I lose Sarah?
Did I lose you?
Oh, I thought it was me for a second. Okay, I think you're back now. You're a bit robot-y, but I do see you. Can you hear me?
What just happened?
Oh, can you hear me okay now?
Are you here?
Yep.
Yeah, I can.
All right, perfect. I don't know if that was me
I
or
was like,
you.
what happened? I don't know.
Anyway.
We both just went blank. I was like, what just happened? But no, it's like, yeah. My family, they just they are not like entwined in social media. I mean, they're like still, I think everybody's still just on Facebook. So I I think that there's a lot of people that just don't see everything that's going on.
Yep.
But a lot of people started to even wake up when the whole Dylan Mulvaney thing happened with Bud Light. Like that was a huge thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man.
That's when a lot of people really got like woke up. That made me realize that some of this stuff, yeah, some of these trends do hit middle America that's not perpetually online, like those of us who work in media.
Yeah, it's weird. I have to say, I could probably talk to you for like 3 hours about stuff. You're awesome. I will. I know I said like an hour and a half, and I will hold you to that. I want to thank you for coming on and give us a few minutes to do a little after segment for
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
on locals. But give everyone a rundown of where they can find you if you have some stuff coming up that people can look forward to.
Yeah. So, I mean, just biggest, easiest way to find me is go to my website, which is just sarahhigdon.com. There's a links page on there. And for some reason, that's the only place that you can find out see all of my, my op-eds and all the freelance articles I was doing for the Post Millennial before I started working there. But then if you just go to, like just to see all my daily news articles and stuff like that, it's just you can just go to postmillennial.com/author/Sara Higdon, and that's where all my stuff is. Same with human events. But other than that, go to my website. You can go to my YouTube. Rumble is just Sara Higdon, and then Instagram and Twitter is Sara Higdon with an underscore after it.
Awesome. Well, like I said, thank you again for joining me, and thank you
Thanks for
ever
having me.
for chat. Oh, it looks like we got a super chat that
Oh.
off topic to read at the end. Has Sarah been to Helen, Georgia? If not, she should. If it's still not weird and fun, don't tell me. But
I haven't been to Helen. I've not really heard it was fun and weird, so I don't know. I think I want to say it's in North Georgia though. I do. I live in Atlanta. And so I'm not sure how far that is away though.
well, thank you for the super chat, Affluent. Appreciate it. Good to see you. And again, thank you to the whole chat for hanging out and watching today. I'm going to record a little segment for locals for people to see on there. Affluent, I know you IRL basically, so maybe I'll just send it to you because I'm a good friend. But thank you again, Sarah. Thank you, chat. I'm going to roll the credits, and we will see everybody next time. See ya.